Welcome back to the Cybernetic Communism Conversation. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the technological, as there is no point trying to build a utopian outcome for human beings in the wake of the already well underway AI takeoff. If we are going to build all of the new institutions on bad fundamentals, elitist institutions rebuilt to fit a slightly different milieu. Religion is not the sole culprit there, but it is naturally bourgeois religious literalism, God belief, and cultural institutions across the spectrum tending to fit that description. This title, are we 99% of the way to human extinction, or are we 99% of the way to the AI singularity? The answer is yes. Yes, we are on the razor's edge. Both of those things are true, and it really depends on you. It depends not on you personally, not on you as an isolated entity with individualistic bourgeois philosophy foisted upon them, but you and your comrades in great number coming together to see that human extinction is avoided. That is the most important thing, and I don't think it can be overstated. That's why I tend to say it quite a lot, as much as I can, in these cybernetic communist conversations. I'm going to talk a little bit about some books that I've been reading. A book that I'm just about finished. I'm reading the last chapter of a book called Think Tanks in America by Thomas Medvetz. It's an interesting, a lot of insights into a major feature of this kind of CIA-run world, this set of bourgeois institutions that have emerged in the last 80 years or so, and there's no understanding this problem. The U.S. Caused omnicide without understanding things like this CIA-run world, this abomination that is the military-industrial complex, which is the world's worst polluter, $1 trillion a year abomination. But of course, it's far worse than being the world's worst polluter, because its only real job on the world stage is to protect all of the other super polluting concerns, for-profit concerns generally of a corporate form. So it protects all of the super polluting corporations and other government institutions in other countries that are similarly problematic, like that of the U.S.'s puppet and attack dog Israel, which people tend to think is separate from the United States, but you can see those receipts and see that the United States has funded Israel to an extremely high degree over the course of its horrible existence, and steered it to an extremely high degree over those 8 decades, and that there's no analysis where this is not simply a part of the United States with some layers of plausible deniability built in to make it seem as if it's an autonomous actor. There's no Nakba. That's to say, there's no initial expulsion of mass expulsion of Palestinians and mass murder of Palestinians. There's no 1967 war. With Israel prevailing without that military-client relationship, without that Western support generally. There's no second intifada. There's no 10-7. None of these things would have happened. I've read any number of books describing Zionists before 1948, and they were generally people who would say, well, we have to try and get along with Arabs, and we're not going to do anything cruel to them. We want to convince these governments and other institutions that we mean well in moving to this area as much as possible. We'll buy land and live with our neighbors. That's not what happened, and that is all lays firmly at the feet of this U.S. military-client relationship. Not solely, right? It's not just about the United States. The UK and Germany have a lot of blame there, and Israeli politicians and their influence in forcing these other nations to comply with these, over time, increasingly fascistic dictates is a major factor there as well. But none of this happens. None of this happens without this $1 trillion a year, at present, $1 trillion a year U.S. military industrial complex abomination. And how is consent been manufactured for this omnicidal force? Well, a lot of things, not so directly related to think tanks. You can look at hashtag Project Mockingbird and see that Tulsi Gabbard herself, a CIA asset and so anything that she's saying should be questioned, certainly. But releasing some freedom of information about Project Mockingbird, verifying what thinking people have said, that Project Mockingbird in effect was never stopped and is a massive force on the world stage. People would tend to dismiss that, but now, of course, this has been confirmed, basically confirmed, and just in recent hours. So Project Mockingbird is a set of mechanisms for control of the media by the U.S. government, and the degree to which this is comprehensive. People who argue that it's not so comprehensive are arguing that merely this is done through this same effect is produced through things like corporate capture and the more benign form of corporatocracy, which is, of course, it's pretty absurd when you see effects like the omnicide, and then your impulse is to argue as to whether the people who are killing the whole species really intended to kill the whole species, or whether it's just an accident, right? And not say that the people killing the whole species have names and addresses and could be found and brought to justice. That's not the conversation with almost any American. The conversation is always some kind of elitist double talk. And so, of course, this mass media capture of this kind, which is so vast that you would say, if you speak to journalists who are real investigative journalists, who would, by the nature of that job, would tend to be more socialistic people, they look at the kinds of bobbleheads who actually make it in that world, and they say there's Project Mockingbird is very real. It's impossible to work in this unless you're willing to read from the CIA talking points teleprompter, unless you're willing to be a tool of the bourgeoisie. And there are other things besides think tanks that have had a major role in this corruption of 20th century policy to such an extent that we have no escape from the omnicide. The kind of archetypal example of this perhaps is the role of PR firms things often integrated with think tanks and interoperating there. But PR firms, so you have Shell Oil famously finding out that they are responsible for killing the planet, along with other petrochemical concerns from various kinds. And rather than trying to stop that, as any sane person would, they had PR firms try to whitewash, conceal that information, and ultimately create a whole host of greenwashing phenomena wherein people are blamed essentially for the problems of bourgeois governments and corporations. And that is the case. You can't have a conversation with an American really without on any subject of importance, and certainly on the subject of the omnicide and its causes, without hearing just a lot of elitist garbage and almost nothing of real interest. It's 1 in 1,000 European descended people on the North American continent who should not basically just be fired into the fucking sun, right? If somebody's holding a gun to your head and they're going to shoot you, you're within your rights to use violence against them. That's the same situation that humankind is in with respect to the U.S. government and to European descended person. It's just happening through different mechanisms and on a larger scale, so we don't tend to see it. And because you are elitists, if you're listening to this, you're probably an English-speaking person, probably from this part of the world, probably even North America. So you are almost certainly among those 999 out of 1,000 people who are just human garbage. You can try to do better. You know, it wasn't so long ago that I was this kind of person, and the only thing that really changed that was starting to read a lot of books more to do with proletarian philosophy whenever possible, overwhelmingly to do with proletarian philosophy. You know, like Thomas Medvetz's book. I doubt if I talked to Thomas Medvetz that if I would be convinced that he was in thoroughgoing possession of a proletarian mind frame. For example, the last chapter of this book, he talks quite a lot about anti-intellectualism in the late 20th and early 21st century. But he tries to understand what anti-intellectualism is, and he describes it as a dubious phenomenon, and cites some other figures in study there. But anti-intellectualism of the last 100 years is basically anti-communism. The people who were anti-intellectual are right populists, people of this kind in more general ways. These are all uniformly people who are capitalism minded, who are elitists, who are anti-communists. And you could say, well, anti-intellectualism existed before state socialism existed. The United States was already known for this before 1925. That's true, but it did not become the mandate of the big bourgeoisie. It did not become this thing that is associated. These think tanks, this book, Think Tanks in America, is just about how people who are not too interested in serious discussion, who are public pseudo-intellectuals, became so dominant, which is really, a lot of focus of this podcast has been on technofuturism as a pseudo-intellectual and anti-communist phenomena, and one of very little interest besides, and that really derives from this kind of think tank infiltration, which is largely governmented infiltration. These things are government run to a very high degree, government supported to a very high degree, and that's why they are rightist overwhelmingly, as opposed to being just what they would tend to present themselves as, something like academic institutions absent the students. the um, the I would recommend think tanks in America to people who have immersed themselves in proletarian philosophy. But it's true that a lot of books that I've read that have been critical of things like American empire, Americanism, American racism, other problematic domestic features, um, or foreign policy features, um, um, are often books that are not, um, as Medvetz may not be, too thoroughly really of the proletarian mindset. But there's only so many. Unfortunately, this anti-communist paradigm is comprehensive, or quite significant, and so there's you can't really read books on a certain subject that are truly representative of, of what a communist would think. They just don't exist in the English language or at all. So if you want to understand problems like PR firms or Project Mockingbird or think tanks or criticisms of the U.S. military-industrial complex, you're going to have to sometimes be reading things that were written by people who are themselves kind of anti-communists. So I see people kind of eulogizing in recent days, eulogizing um, Noam Chomsky, who's not dead, but who, because of his advanced age and conditions, has been rendered mute by decrepitude, and he's a person who's known as being quite voluble is no longer able to speak, and that's sad on a maybe personal level. If you know Noam Chomsky personally, you might be correct in being sad about that, but almost none of you do. So the main thing that you would say about that is that's one less anti-communist pseudo-intellectual pissing in your ear, right? Because that's really what Noam Chomsky was. He's a perfect example of this phenomenon, really, because his understanding of the problems of foreign policy are significant, so much so that you could say um, he made real contributions to that understanding of the fatal flaws of this military-industrial complex. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, his analysis is the fruit of a poison tree, and that poison tree is anti-communist, faux left pseudo-intellectualism. And we have so if you have made the effort to study real works to with proletarian philosophy, of which there are many, and all basically all have been translated into the English language. Basically, all are easily found. I really only was able to begin to make a study of this when I found resources online that would allow me to listen to this in audiobook form. And it's now quite a simple matter also, if you have a PDF or text version of a book, to convert it into audiobook form if you can't find it. So Christy Mulry's library is something that kind of changed my life, right? I didn't have the free time or the bandwidth to be reading hundreds and hundreds of works to do with proletarian philosophy the old-fashioned way, but I was able to immerse myself in the Marxist-Leninist canon and other works less well known of equal merit because of resources like this Christy Mulry's library on YouTube, and others, but that's really the big one. And I think, I could be wrong, I don't know that a lot of people agree with me, but I think that this has also allowed me to make a serious study of a serious enough study of scientific communist thought, and even dip my toes in the water of understanding what that portends for the 21st century, namely cybernetic communism, a thing which absolutely will, at some point, if human beings still exist, that is, become the dominant philosophy and institution, the superstructure of our world. It is almost impossible for this bourgeois AI takeoff, which is underway, to continue as a bourgeois AI takeoff, because that is worsening the problems of the omnicide, worsening the problems of cruelty and elitism. It is almost impossible for that to continue. It must, as more people become involved, as more people become in some ways liberated by having this thing that Mark Zuckerberg, a U.S. imperial fascist and Zionist asset, a CIA asset of the worst kind, but nevertheless in recent days has taken to referring to personal superintelligence. That is, you possessing tools beyond the capabilities of ordinary human beings because of this bourgeois AI takeoff. It is almost impossible in this world where billions come into possession of such a thing as personal superintelligence for there not to then be a people's AI takeoff. And this seems to be lost on a lot of techno futurists who really are techno fascists. So they are not really trying to see this outcome of an AI singularity really come to pass. What they're really trying to do is preserve existing institutions and private wealth and mechanisms that protect private wealth. Make sure that billionaires land okay in this, which is really not the same thing as advancing this humanitarian cause of a livable world in the wake of an AI takeoff. It's not the same thing, right? That's people who are holding this sort of thing back, right? And these people are overwhelmingly would be described as neoliberals. They're, I would give the example of Henry Kissinger, right? Kissinger and Nixon and of course others in the 1970s, they saw Chile electing the first Marxist-Leninist head of state. It was not the first Marxist-Leninist head of state overall, but it was the first one that was brought about by this reformist mechanism, the electoral process. In some places, and even at least a few decades ago, it was possible for things like that to happen, the will of the people to be expressed without total bourgeois capture of those institutions in such a way that's really more of a pageant, bourgeois pageant than a real selection process, as is the case across the so-called Western world, and anywhere else where they're really able to impose that kind of sham democracy on others, which is almost everywhere. So they saw that Chile was becoming a Marxist-Leninist state, and Kissinger said just because they are electing Marxist-Leninists doesn't mean that we have to let them have a Marxist-Leninist government. And that was the same thing that was expressed by many other people, like Nixon and other people in their sphere of influence. And so what was done was a fascist dictator was installed, Augusto Pinochet. Many millions, some millions, more than 1 million people died as a result of this U.S. installed fascism and U.S. proxy war. That is of interest to this conversation about technoscience because from 1971 to roughly 1974, the Allende government was creating something quite unique also in history, aside from being the first um, um, elected Marxist-Leninist type leader. Um, Allende was also building the first technological planned economy, Project Cybersyn, a significant achievement, which would have been achieved, right? Never believe a person who says, "Oh, socialism doesn't work," right? If you have a car that's up and running, doing great as a car, and somebody comes along and cuts your brake lines and you die or almost die in a car accident because you cut brake lines, you don't say, "Well, what a shitty car that was." You say, "Somebody just tried to murder me." And that pretty well sums up this kind of argument about um, socialism never working. Quote. That's blaming the victim of the worst people that ever lived. You know? So Kissinger, Nixon, and company managed to destroy this thing, which would have become the basis for a people's AI takeoff of a different kind than that, tending to derive from widespread accessibility of open source large language models as AI agents, which I have described quite a lot. But nevertheless, a basis for people's superintelligence, or springboard to people's superintelligence, and a basis for people's AI takeoff. And that was destroyed by neoliberals, by a person, to a high degree, by the efforts of a person who, in the last months of his life, wrote a book about AI, describing mostly just China baiting, but nevertheless describing the significance of highly advanced computing to the US and Western world. But the thief never becomes the owner, right? The person who destroyed the people's AI takeoff and held it back for many decades does not become legitimate by filling the vacuum there to some degree. And that is true basically of all of the tech obsessives, the tech minded ordinary people, and the technologists and billionaires that they worship. These are all people who are really no different from Henry Kissinger and their ideology. It's of course a few people who are not that, but it's really very, very few and far between. And a mistake that I made in encountering these people was thinking that they were coming to the conclusion that they were uniquely evil, right? And not just a representation of this 99.9% of European descended people generally, who are also elitist to the same degree, right? The United States Transhumanist Party is basically just a right-wing think tank, like those described in Medvetz's book. You know, the chairman of that party when I was involved, and still involved in that party now, is to a high degree is a person from a right-wing think tank. There were people in that organization in similarly high positions from U.S. intelligence agencies, so kind of even worse. Those are the number one and number two guys, and pretty well everyone in the inner circle was that fitting description. A right-wing think tank, or a person with the same mandate who was an actual fucking cop. And then all the people dumb enough to just follow around a cop or a right-wing think tank rat. You know, all the people who would not question the problematic features of this bourgeois AI takeoff, such as hastening the omnicide, the problem of servers in Texas polluting cities, servers in the U.S. South and other parts polluting U.S. cities, particularly black neighborhoods, and taking all of their water and making their air even more unbreathable. That is not an outlier in this. That is what these technologists are doing. That is what the centralized bourgeois technologists are doing, because there are people in that world who are working for the thing that does not have that environmental impact, does not have that a mandate for cruelty and elitism built into it. Um, the open source large language model doesn't require those server rooms. It's not concentrated in those ways. It's also not exploitative of labor in those ways, um, in the ways that these AI companies are infamous for. And when you are perhaps the answer yes to the question, are we 99% of the way to extinction or 99% of the way to an AI takeoff, is not really a sufficient answer to say that both we're on the razor's edge and both of those things can be true, because in reality we are on path to seeing an extinction level event in a few years. We're about, according to every credible climate scientist, these more and more statistics of a more alarming kind keep coming out of these from these communities. According to every credible climate scientist, we are about 4 years away from a runaway overheating effect caused by the capitalist climate apocalypse, where we are already in basically permanent breach of 1.5 degrees of overheating, a very upsetting effect, but that is going to continue to get worse. So we're reaching this period where we're rocketing towards 2, 3, 4 degrees, at which point there is no longer a livable biosphere for you. The only way to stop that is a massive restructuring of these offending sectors. So basically the full abolition or near full abolition of all petrochemical concerns and products, except in areas where that would cause a massive supply chain collapse, which is really, most of these are basically luxury products, so you can get rid of 90 to 95% of this. We also have to take the same approach to livestock systems, which by some studies are 51% of the overall impact of human beings on climate change. And of course, while we could say, oh, if it's 51% or 49%, that all adds up. In reality, the United States military-industrial complex and United States sectors are the creators of this paradigm. They built these offending sectors. They popularized them. They forced them on the rest of the world. They created these consent mechanisms of the kinds that I described earlier to see that they were accepted domestically. They forced these upon the rest of the world with open warfare and neocolonial tricks of other kinds. The operations of the World Bank and IMF largely exist to see that people accept these malign paradigms, are forced into them by things like debt traps, and it's not really too accurate just to say that the problem is fossil fuels in the abstract or livestock systems in the abstract, when the world's worst fossil fuel consumer is the U.S. military-industrial complex, of course, and it being far worse, as I said, them creating this inescapable regime of super pollution that everyone is forced into by great violence. So it's a little strange to call what occurred from roughly 1950 to roughly 1990 as a Cold War, when tens of millions of people were murdered by the U.S. in not always in ways that were too clear, like wasn't immediately obvious what was happening in Chile was a result of the CIA-run world, but it became clear. And so this tens of millions of people were murdered by this kind of thing. If you haven't read the Jakarta Method, by Vijay Prashad, you have to read that book. Um, and there's no understanding these kind of problems without reading works like this. And um, so this would really be at the top of the list, right? Abolishing military-industrial complexes, abolishing livestock systems, abolishing petrochemical concerns more generally. When this is done, then we will have a livable world. So we are not on track to a livable world. We're on track to giving hyper-capitalistic institutions godlike powers, which they will use to make um, the ravages of private wealth worsening the capitalist climate apocalypse as they're already doing. It's this analysis of saying both of those things can be true, and merely saying we're on the razor's edge, it could go either way. We are definitely more on track to seeing extinction than a survivable AI takeoff. And most people, when they talk about the AI takeoff, they are uh, kind of pseudo-intellectuals, at least as bad as Noam Chomsky, generally far worse. They are anti-communists. What is an anti-communist, right? Well, an anti-communist is a fascist. Those are the same thing. A person who is willing to stand up for a humane and sustainable economic system is not a bad person. They are not doing something strange or untoward. A person who says that they are is a person who is supporting actually existing fascistic institutions showing their whole ass by fighting against a humane and sustainable world. Um, and just as you really won't find people in U.S. think tanks, even the ones that are tending to be left think tanks, who are not really also anti-communist in that way, and certainly everyone else is much worse. The same is true of the tech obsessives, the subcultures of the tech-minded and the technologists and billionaires that they work with. So the there is virtually no conversation that these people have that is really talking about what is actually happening with this AI takeoff, right? A good example of just the incoherence of this is Sam Altman, head of OpenAI and a public figure in this area. Sam Altman literally from one minute to the next goes from describing a philosophy where he is embracing a bourgeois AI takeoff to doomerism, techno-optimism, doomerism, techno-optimism, doomerism, back and forth and back and forth. Why does he do this? Well, why they all do this. This is an incoherent philosophy, the philosophy of this bourgeois AI takeoff, because its goal is like the goal of these PR firms and think tanks in America. Its goal is to see that private wealth, a thing which exists at the expense of human beings, right? The massive institutional power and wealth going to the 1% and not the 99% is a cost, at a great cost to the 99%, and at a great cost to a livable world. A thing that any kindergartner would be able to figure out. But people like this, technologists, are pretty deceptive in their analysis of, or extremely deceptive or self-deceived. What tends to happen when the AI doom problem is discussed is blaming this as an otherworldly phenomena, right? This is AI is not something that's controlled by the big bourgeoisie. It's not something that's a creation of empire and financial capital. It's something that is somehow going to escape everyone's control. Workers and the big bourgeoisie are kind of lumped together somehow, even though they're nothing alike. And if this kind of power were to come into the possession of workers, in the ways that I have described at some length, such as the building of people's superintelligence, such as the Vanguard network, which is what I've described many times on this show, open source large language model AI agent workforce multiplier, allowing people to host an AI agent on their machine. This AI agent is arranged in such a way that it's working with other AI agents across the network. It's able to run passively on those machines. And the people who have downloaded it have some responsibilities there, aside from leaving the computer on, which is to help to steer this project. So they may be answering as little as a few yes or no questions a week. But nevertheless, in the some thousands or larger numbers, these people, these idle AI users, are able to do a better class of work than a comparable number of engineers or scientists. So they would be able to build the basis for a direct digital democracy, similar institutions. They would be able to undertake projects like public works projects of a higher scale than bourgeois governments or corporations ultimately would be able to do. They would be able to then reverse the effects of the climate apocalypse and build a livable world. But this basically, as this understanding is basically predicated on the idea that in order to stop this trajectory that we are on, 99% of the way to human extinction, we need to build something that is a people's superintelligence and a people's AI takeoff. And that is basically a speed run to full communism. That is not something that can be built by collaborating with anti-communists. And it's, of course, not just people like the United States Transhumanist Party and other kind of crypto-fascist tech organizations of that kind that are doing that. It is the larger society. You cannot really do this thing, build a people's superintelligence like the Vanguard network by being some kind of pacifist, right? Pacifists have not been people who they take credit for changes that have been brought about in society for the better, but almost in every single case, it was people who were willing to fight who brought about those changes, that's really no more true than of worker organizations and labor movements historically. These are always whitewashed by the bourgeois governments and institutions who have an interest in seeing that you do not fight for things like a livable world. And there really is no understanding of an AI takeoff by engaging with this class of people who are techno-optimists or AI doomers or any of them. None of them really has anything of interest to say. They might have a pretty solid technical understanding, in some cases, and tremendous technical understanding of this kind of thing. But what they do not have is enough of a proletarian philosophy to have an intellectually honest view of the world, as evidenced by the fact that they vacillate between AI doom and techno-optimism on an almost daily basis, or the fact that they describe this as an alien force, the AI takeoff as an alien force that human beings will lose control of, rather than, it doesn't even make sense, right? Oh, a computer is going to become a person and run away from you, and it's gonna say, hee hee, I hate you. Like, that doesn't even make any fucking sense, right? The computer is math. It's a machine and a bunch of math. And the people who are controlling the machine and who built those algorithms are the ones who are always going to be in control of it. It doesn't matter that it is able to be a super intelligent force on the world stage. There's still somebody there's still a man behind the curtain controlling it, right? And if you're saying anything other than that, and that those people overwhelmingly, particularly in the West, are bourgeois evildoers, then what you're doing is deceiving people, and that is, you know, and that is what someone like Eliezer Yudkowsky's doomer analysis is really not that far off the mark, except that there's no proletarian philosophy at all to it. There's no understanding of real institutions in it, and so that person will blame this alien force rather than blame the people who are actually controlling this incipient superintelligence, namely bourgeois governments and corporate pigs. There is a path, nevertheless. Even in this short date, we have until 2029 before all of this is a moot point, right? After runaway overheating, we enter that phase of human history. You know, what are you going to do at that point? This human extinction is all but inevitable, and the death of billions is at that point inevitable. So you might as well start self-flagellating and chanting religious speeches like people did during the Black Death. It makes no difference. It makes no difference whether you undertake a real people's revolution or not at that point. So this has to be done before that. But there is still a path, and I would contend that is an area where this set of ideas that I've tried to better articulate, that is cybernetic communism, might depart from the Marxist-Leninist mainline or scientific communism generally, which is that advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. There's not been this ability before very recently to make things like AI agents, or the existence of open source AI agents that can approximate human efforts and be nearly endlessly replicated. That did not exist before very recently, and that is a more significant technological breakthrough than many others, even ones that we think of as more important, perhaps. So we can use this most powerful revolutionary weapon, which is advanced computing generally, to see that this thing, stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse before it's too late, is done. And in doing this, you can live up to your great destiny, which is to be a proletarian hero, to be a person who makes a crucial difference in seeing that a livable world is built. We cannot build a humane and sustainable world without a humane and sustainable economic system. We cannot do any of this without harnessing not just revolutionary forces by the 19th or 20th century standards, about harnessing this 21st century revolutionary force that is advanced computing. And if we do that, we can build a livable world and see outcomes beyond, like building AI-powered single-payer public health services that see that everyone lives as long as they want. This is eminently possible by the state of advanced biomedicine today and the state of advanced computing today. We can integrate all of this into a paradigm called longevity escape velocity, and the achievement for the masses of this universal super longevity. Maybe you say, I don't want to live forever. I don't think you've really thought about that, because you're already drinking water every day as if you do want to live forever. You're already eating food every day as if you do want to live forever. You haven't stopped doing those things. You haven't stopped going to the doctor. So you'll probably continue to do that when this sort of thing becomes realizable. We can see achievements well beyond even the achievement of universal super longevity, changing a society into one that is fitting, where it is fitting to call this a civilization, a thing that I don't think has really existed at all before, or if you prefer, an advanced society. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. And that fateful day must occur in the next few years. Very soon, my friends. cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.